All right, now my one son's gone, the other one is watching TV. We are going to read. Now, part 4. The storage area. Problems with the generators. What happened to the bag boy? Billy began to act hysterical and tantrumy, screaming for his mother in a hoarse, demanding way through his tears, the little 5-year-old, instantly regressing to the age of 2. Snot was lathered on his upper lip. I led him away, walked down one of the middle aisles with my arm around his shoulders, trying to soothe him. I took him back by the long white meat cabinet that ran the length of the store at the back. Mr. McVeigh, the butcher, was still there. We nodded at each other, the best we could under the circumstances. I sat down on the floor and took Billy on my lap and held his face against my chest and rocked him and talked to him. I told him all the lies parents keep in reserve for bad situations, the ones that sound so damn plausible to a child, and I told him in a tone of perfect conviction. "That's not a regular fog," Billy said. He looked up at me, his eyes dark-circled and tear-streaked. "It isn't, is it, Daddy?" "No, I don't think so," I didn't want to lie about that. Kids don't fight shock the way adults do. They go with it, maybe because kids are in a semi-permanent state of shock until they're 13 or so. Billy started to doze off, and I held him, thinking he might snap awake again. But his doze deepened into a real sleep. Maybe he had been awake part of the night before, when we had slept 3 in a bed for the first time since Billy was an infant. And maybe, I felt a cold eddy slip through me at the time, maybe he had sensed something coming. When I was sure he was solidly out, I laid him on the floor and went looking for something to cover him up with. Most of the people were still up front, looking out into the thick blanket of mist. Norton had gathered a little crowd of listeners and was busy spellbinding, or trying to. Bud Brown stood rigidly at his post, but Ollie Weeks had left his. There were a few people in the aisles, wandering like ghosts, their faces greasy with shock. I went to the storage area through the big double doors between the meat cabinet and the beer cooler. The generator roared steadily behind its plywood partition. I am trying to read to stop it. Slap you. Okay. But something had gone wrong. I could smell diesel fumes, and they were much too strong. I walked toward the partition, taking shallow breaths. At last, I unbuttoned my shirt and put part of it over my mouth and nose. The storage area was long and narrow, feebly lit by 2 sets of emergency lights. Cartons were stacked everywhere. Bleach on one side, cases of soft drinks on the far side of the partition, stacked cases of beefaroni and catsup. One of those had fallen over, and the cardboard carton appeared to be bleeding. I unlatched the door in the generator partition and stepped through. The machine was obscured in drifting oil clouds of blue smoke. The exhaust pipe ran through a hole in the wall. Something must have blocked off the outside end of the pipe. There was a simple on and off switch, and I flipped it. The generator hitched, belched, coughed, and died. Then it ran down in a diminishing series of popping sounds that reminded me of Norton's stubborn chainsaw. The emergency lights faded out, and I was left in darkness. I got scared very quickly, and I got disoriented. My breathing sounded like a low wind rattling in straw. I bumped my nose with a flimsy plywood door going out, and my heart lurched. There were windows in the double doors, but for some reason they had been painted black, and the darkness was nearly total. I got off course and ran into a stack of bleach cartons. They tumbled and fell. One came close enough to my head to make me step backward, and I tripped over another carton that had landed behind me. I fell down, thumping my head hard enough to see bright stars in the darkness. Good show. I lay there cursing myself, rubbing my head, telling myself to take it easy, just get up and get out of there, get back to Billy. telling myself nothing soft and slimy was going to cover over me, over my ankle, or slip into one groped hand. I told myself not to lose control, or I would end up blundering around back here in a panic, knocking things over, and creating a mad obstacle course for myself. I stood up carefully, looking for a pencil line of light between the double doors. I found it. A faint but unmistakable scratch on the darkness. I started toward it and then stopped. There was a sound, a soft, sliding sound. Stopped and then started again in a stealthy little bump. Everything inside me went loose. I regressed magically to 4 years of age. That sound wasn't coming from the market. It was coming from behind me, from outside, where the mist was. Something that was slipping and sliding and scratching over the cinder blocks. And maybe looking for a way in. Or maybe it was already in and it was looking for me. Maybe in a moment, I would feel whatever was making that sound on my shoe or on my neck. It came again. I was positive it was outside. But that didn't make it any better. I told my legs to go and they refused the order. Then the quality of the noise changed. Something rasped across the darkness and my heart leaped in my chest. And I lunged at the thin vertical line of light. I hit the door's straight arm and burst through into the market. 3 or 4 people were right outside the double doors. Ollie Weeks was one of them, and they all jumped back in surprise. Ollie grabbed at his chest. "David," he said in a pinched voice. "Jesus Christ! You want to take 10 years off my—" He saw my face. "What's the matter with you? Did you hear it?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, high and squeaking. "Did any of you hear it?" They hadn't heard anything, of course. They had come up to see why the generator had gone off. As Ollie told me that, one of the bag boys bustled up with an armload of flashlights. He looked from Ollie to me curiously. "I turned the generator off," I said, and explained why. "What did you hear?" One of the other men asked. He worked for the town road department. His name was Jim something. "I don't know, a scratching noise, slitherly. I don't want to hear it again." "Nerves?" the other fellow with Ollie said. "No, it was not nerves." "Did you hear it before the lights went out?" "No, only after, but nothing. I could see the way they were looking at me. They didn't want any more bad news, anything else frightening or off kilter. There was enough of that already, only Ollie looked as if he believed me." "Let's go in and start her up again," the bag boy said, handing out the flashlights. Ollie took his doubtfully. The bag boy offered me one, a slight, contemptuous shine in his eyes. He was maybe 18. After a moment's thought, I took the light. I still needed something to cover Billy with. Ollie opened the doors and choked them, letting in some light. The bleached cartons lay scattered across the half-open door and the plywood partition. A fellow named Jim sniffed and said, "Smells pretty rank, all right. Guess she was right to shut her down." The flashlight beams bobbed and danced across cartons of canned goods, toilet paper, dog food. The beams were smoky in the drifting fumes that blocked exhaust. The blocked exhaust had turned back into the storage area. The bag boy trained his light briefly on the wide loading door at the extreme right. The 2 men and Ollie went inside the generator compartment. Their lights flashed uneasily back and forth, reminding me of something out of a boy's adventure story. And I illustrated a series of them while I was still in college. Pirates burying their bloody gold at midnight, or maybe the mad doctor and his assistant snatching a body. Shadows, made twisted and monstrous by the shifting, conflicting flashlight beams, bobbed on the walls. The generator ticked irregularly as it cooled. The bag boy was walking toward the loading door, flashing his light ahead of him. "I wouldn't go over there, I said. "No, I know you wouldn't." "Try it now, Ollie," one of the men said. The generator wheezed and roared. "Jesus, shut her down, holy crow! Don't that stink? Blah, blah, blah." The generator died again. The bag boy walked back from the loading door just as they came out. "Something's plugged that exhaust all right," one of the men said. "I'll tell you what," the bag boy said. His eyes were shining in the glow of the flashlights, and there was a devil-may-care expression on his face that I had sketched too many times as part of the frontispieces of my boys' adventure series. Get it running long enough for me to raise the loading door back there. I'll go around and clear away whatever it is. Norm, I don't think that's a good idea, Ollie said doubtfully. Is it an electric door? The one called Jim asked. Sure, Ollie said. But I just don't think it would be wise for. That's okay, the other guy said. He tipped his baseball cap back on his head. I'll do it. No, you don't understand, Ollie began again. I really don't think anyone should. Don't worry, he said indulgently to Ollie, dismissing him. Norm, the bag boy, was indignant. Listen, it was my idea, he said. All at once, by some magic, they had gotten around to arguing about who was going to go do it instead of whether or not it should be done at all. But of course, none of them had heard that nasty slithering sound. Stop it, I said loudly. They looked around at me. You don't seem to understand, or you're trying as hard as you can not to understand. This is no ordinary fog. Nobody has come into the market since it hit. If you open that loading door and something comes in, something like what? Norm said with perfect 18-year-old macho contempt. Whatever made the noise I heard. Mr. Drayton, Jim said, pardon me, but I'm not convinced you heard anything. I know you're a big-shot artist with connections in New York and Hollywood and all, but that doesn't make you any different from anyone else in my book. The way I figure, you got in there in the dark and maybe you just got a little confused. Maybe I did, I said. And maybe if you want to start screwing around outside, you ought to start by making sure that lady got home safe to her kids. His attitude, and that of his buddy and Norm the bag boy, was making me mad and scaring me more at the same time. They had the sort of light in their eyes that some men get when they go shooting rats at the town dump. Hey, Jim's buddy said, when any of us here want your advice, we'll ask for it. Hesitantly, Ollie said, the generator really isn't that important, you know. The food in the cold cases will keep for 12 hours or more, with absolutely no. Okay, kid, you're it, Jim said brusquely. I'll start the motor. You raise the doors so that the place doesn't stink up too bad. Me and Myron will be standing by the exhaust outflow. Give us a yell when it's clear. Sure, Norm said, and bustles excitedly away. This is crazy, I said. You let that lady go by herself. I didn't notice you breaking your ass to escort her, Jim's buddy Myron said. A dull brick-colored flush was creeping out of his collar. But you're going to let this kid risk his life over a generator that doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter? Why don't you just shut the fuck up, Norm yelled. Listen, Mr. Drayton, Jim said and smiled at me coldly. I'll tell you what. If you've got anything else to say, I think you better count your teeth first, because I'm tired of listening to your bullshit. Ollie looked at me plainly frightened. I shrugged. They were crazy, that was all. Their sense of proportion was temporarily gone. Out there, they had been confused and scared, and here was a straightforward, mechanical problem. A bulky generator. It was possible to solve this problem. Solving the problem would help make them feel less confused and helpless. Therefore, they would solve it. Jim and his friend, Myron, decided I knew when I was licked and went into the generator compartment. Ready, Norm? Jim asked. Norm nodded, then realized they couldn't hear a nod. Yeah, he said. Norm, I said, don't be a fool. It's a mistake, Ollie added. He looked at us, and suddenly his face was much younger than 18. It was the face of a boy. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively, and I saw that he was scared green. He opened his mouth to say something. I think he was going to call it off. But then the generator roared into life again. And when it was running smoothly, Norm lunged at the button to the right of the door, and it began to rattle upward on its dual steel tracks. The temporary lights had come back on when the generator started. Now they dimmed down as the motor which lifted the door sucked away the juice. The shadows ran backward and melted. The storage area began to fill with the mellow white light of an outcast late winter day. I noticed that odd, acrid smell again. The loading door went up 2 feet, then 4. Beyond, I could see a square cement platform outlined around the edges of the yellow stripe. The yellow faded and washed out in just 3 feet. The fog was incredibly thick. "Oh, up!" Norm yelled. Tendrils of mist, as white and fine as floating lace, eddied inside. The air was cold. It had been noticeably cool all morning long, especially after the sticky heat of the last 3 weeks. But it had been a summery coolness. This was cold. It was like March. I shivered, and I thought of Steph. The generator died. Jim came out just as Norm ducked under the door. He saw it. So did I. So did Ollie. A tentacle came over the far lip of the concrete loading platform and grabbed Norm around the calf. My mouth dropped wide open. Ollie made a very short, lateral sound of surprise. Ugh! The tentacle tapered from the thickness of a foot, the size of a grass snake, at the point where it had wrapped itself around Norm's lower leg, to the thickness of maybe 4 or 5 feet, where it disappeared into the mist. It was a slate gray on top, shading to a fleshy pink underneath, and there were rows of suckers on the underside. They were moving and withering like hundreds of small, puckering mouths. Norm looked down. He saw what had him. His eyes bulged. "Get it off me! Hey, get it off me! Christ Jesus, get the freaking thing off me!" "Oh, my God," Jim whimpered. Norm grabbed the bottom edge of the loading door and yanked himself back in. The tentacle seemed to bulge, the way your arm will when you flex it. Norm was yanked back against the corrugated steel door. His head clanged against it. The tentacle bulged more, and Norm's legs and torso began to slip back out. The bottom edge of the loading door scraped the shirt tail out of his pants. He yanked savagely and pulled himself back in like a man doing a chin-up. "Help me!" he was sobbing. "Help me, you guys! Please, please!" "Jesus, Mary, Joseph," Myron said. He had come out of the generator apartment to see what was going on. I was the closest, and I grabbed Norm around the waist and yanked as hard as I could, rocking back on my heels. For a moment we moved backwards, but only for a moment. It was like stretching a rubber band or pulling taffy. The tentacle yielded, but gave up its basic grip not at all. Then 3 more tentacles floated out of the mist toward us. One curled around Norm's flapping red federal apron and tore it away. It disappeared back into the mist with the red cloth curled in its grip. And I thought of something my mother used to say when my brother and I would beg for something she didn't want us to have: candy, a comic book, some toy. "You need that like a hen needs a flag," she'd say. I thought of that and thought of the tentacle waving Norm's red apron around, and I got laughing. Except my laughter and Norm's scream sounded about the same. Maybe no one ever knew I was laughing except me. The other 2 tentacles slithered aimlessly back and forth on the landing platform for a moment, making those low, scraping sounds I had heard earlier. Then one of them slapped against Norm's left hip and slipped around it. I felt it touch my arm. It was warm and pulsing and smooth. I think now that if it had gripped me with those suckers, I would have gone out into the mist too. But I didn't. It grabbed Norm, and the 3rd tentacle ringletted around his other ankle. Now he was being pulled away from me. "Help me," I shouted. "Ollie, someone, give me a hand here." But they didn't come. I don't know what they were doing, but they didn't come. I looked down and saw the tentacle around Norm's waist, working it into his skin. The suckers were eating him where his shirt had pulled out of the pants. Blood, as red as his missing apron, began to seep out of the trench the pulsing tentacle had made for itself. I banged my head on the lower edge of the partly raised door. Norm's legs were outside again. One of his loafers had fallen off. A new tentacle came out of the mist, wrapped its tip firmly around the shoe, and made off with it. Norm's fingers clutched at the door's lower edge. He had it in a death grip. His fingers were livid. He was not screaming anymore. He was beyond that. His head whipped back and forth in an endless gesture of negation, and his long black hair flew wildly. I looked over his shoulder and saw more tentacles coming, dozens of them, a forest of them. Most were small, but a few were gigantic, as thick as the moss corseted tree that had been lying across our driveway that morning. The big ones had candy pink suckers that seemed the size of manhole covers. One of these big boys struck the concrete loading platform with a loud and rolling thwop or thrup sound and moved sluggishly toward us like a giant blind earthworm. It gave one gigantic tug, and the tentacle holding Norm's right calf slipped a little. That was all. But before it reestablished its grip, I saw that the thing was eating him away. One of the tentacles brushed delicately past my cheek and then waved in the air, as if debating. I thought of Billy then. Billy was lying asleep in the market by Mr. McVeigh's long white meat cooler. I had come in here to find something to cover him with. If one of those things got a hold of me, there would be no one to watch out for him, except for maybe Norton. So I let go of Norm and dropped to my hands and knees. I was half in and half out, directly under the raised door. A tentacle passed by me on my left, seemed to walk on its suckers. It attached itself to one of Norm's bulging upper arms, pausing for a second, then slid around it in coils. Now Norm looked like something out of a madman's dream of snake charming. Tentacles twisted over him uneasily, almost everywhere, and they were all around me as well. I made a clumsy leapfrog jump back inside, landed on my shoulder, and rolled. Jim, Ollie, and Myron were standing there. They stood like a tableau of waxworks at Madame Tussaud's. Their faces pale, their eyes too bright. Jim and Myron flanked the door to the generator compartment. Start the generator, I yelled at them. Neither moved. They were staring at a drugged thanatonic avidly. With a drugged thanatonic, avidity at the loading bay. I groped at the floor, picked up the first thing that came to hand, a box of snowy bleach, and chucked it at Jim. It hit him in the gut, just above the belt buckle. He grunted and grabbed it himself. His eyes flickered back into some semblance of normality. Go start the fucking generator! I screamed so loudly it hurt my throat. He didn't move. Instead, he began to defend himself, apparently having decided that, with Norm being eaten alive by some insane horror from the mist, the time had come for rebuttals. I'm sorry, he whined. I don't know. How the hell was I supposed to know? You said you heard something, but I didn't know what you meant. You should have said what you meant better. I thought, I don't know, maybe a bird or something. So then Ollie moved, bunting him aside with one thick shoulder and blundering into the generator room. Jim stumbled over one of the bleach containers and fell down, just as I had done in the dark. I'm sorry, he said again. His red hair had tumbled over his brow. His cheeks were cheese white. His eyes were those of a horrified little boy. Seconds later, the generator coughed and rumbled into life. I turned back to the loading door. Norm was almost gone. Yet he clung grimly with one hand. His body boiled with tentacles, and blood pattered serenely down on the concrete in dime-sized droplets. His head whipped back and forth, and his eyes bulged with terror as they stared off into the mist. Other tentacles now crept and crawled over the floor inside. There were too many near the button that controlled the loading door to even think of approaching it. One of them closed around a half-liter bottle of Pepsi and carried it off. Another slipped around a cardboard carton and squeezed. The carton ruptured, and the rolls of toilet paper, 2 stacks of Delsey wrapped in cellophane, geysered upward, came down, and rolled everywhere. Tentacles seized them eagerly. One of the big ones slipped in. Its tip rose from the floor, and it seemed to sniff the air. It began to advance toward Myron, and he stepped mincingly away from it. His eyes rolled madly in their sockets. A high-pitched little moan escaped his slack lips. I looked around for something, anything at all, long enough to reach over the questing tentacles and punch the shut button on the wall. I saw a janitor's push broom leaning against the stack of beer cases, and I grabbed it. Norm's good hand was ripped loose. He thudded down onto the concrete loading platform and scrambled madly for a grip with his one free hand. His eyes met mine for a moment. They were hellishly bright and aware. He knew what was happening to him, that he was pulled, bumping and rolling into the mist. There was another scream, choked off. Norm was gone. I pushed the tip of the broom handle onto the button, and the motor whined. The door began to slide back down. It touched the thickest of the tentacle first, the one that had been investigating in Myron's direction. It indented its hide, skin, whatever, and then pierced it. The black goo began to spurt from it. It withered madly, whipping across the concrete storage area like an obscene bullwhip, and then it seemed to flatten out. A moment later, it was gone, and the others began to withdraw. I gotta fix my chair, and I'm gonna put my little leg up here. Ah, there's my leg. I got it. I had to get a little comfy. That's all. I had to get a little comfy. Yeah. Okay. Ready? The others began to withdraw. One of them had a 5-pound bag of Gaines dog food, and it wouldn't let go. The descending door cut it in two before thumping home in its grooved slot. The severed chunk of tentacles squeezed convulsively tighter, splitting the bag open and sending brown nuggets of dog food everywhere. Then it began to flop on the floor like a fish out of water, curling and uncurling, but ever more slowly until it lay still. I prodded it with the tip of the broom, piece of tentacle, maybe 3 feet long, closed on it savagely for a moment, then loosened and lay limp again in the confused litter of toilet paper, dog food, and bleach cartons. There was no sound except for the roar of the generator and Ollie crying inside the plywood compartment. I could see him sitting on the stool in there, with his face clutched in his hands. Then I became aware of another sound, a soft, slithering sound I had heard in the dark. Only now, the sound was multiplied tenfold. It was the sound of tentacles squirming over the outside loading door, trying to find a way in. Myron took a couple of steps toward me. Look, he said, you got to understand. I looped a fist in his face. He was too surprised to even try to block it. It landed just below his nose and smashed his upper lip into his teeth. Blood flowed into his mouth. You got him killed, I shouted. Did you get a good look at it? Did you get a good look at what you did? That's harsh. I started to pummel him, throwing wild rights and lefts, not punching the way I had been taught in my college boxing classes, but only hitting out. He stepped back, shaking some of them off, taking others with the numbness that seemed like a kind of resignation or penance. That made me angrier. I bloodied his nose. I raised what? I bloodied his nose. I raised a mouse under one of his eyes that was going to black just beautifully. I clipped him a hard one on the chin. After that one, his eyes went cloudy and semi-vacant. Look, he kept saying, look, look. And then I punched him low and then I punched him low in the stomach, and the air went out of him, and he didn't say, look, look anymore. I don't know how long I would have gone on punching him, but someone grabbed my arms. I jerked free and turned around. I was hoping to see Jim. I wanted to punch Jim out too. But it wasn't Jim, it was Ollie. his round face dead pale, except for the dark circles under his eyes that were still shiny from his tears. "Don't, David," he said. "Don't hit him any more. He doesn't solve anything." Jim was standing off to one side, his face a bewildered blank. A kicked carton of something. He kicked it. Oh my God. I kicked a carton of something at him. It struck one of the dingo boots and bounced away. "You and your buddy are a couple of stupid assholes," I said. "Come on, David," Ollie said unhappily. "Quit it. You two assholes got that kid killed." Jim looked down at the dingo boots. Myron sat on the floor and held his beer belly. I was breathing hard. The blood was roaring in my ears, and I was trembling all over. I sat down on a couple of cartons and put my hand down between my knees and gripped my legs hard, just above the ankles. I sat that way for quite a while, with my hair in my face, waiting to see if I was going to black out or puke or what. After a bit, the feeling began to pass, and I looked up at Ollie. His pinky ring flashed subdued fire in the glow of the emergency lights. "Okay," I said dully, "I'm done." "Good," Ollie said. "We've got to think what to do next." The storage area was beginning to stink of exhaust again. "Shut the generator down, that's the first thing." "Yeah, let's get out of here," Myron said. His eyes appealed to me. "I'm sorry about the kid, but you gotta understand." "I don't gotta understand anything. You and your buddy go back into the market, and you wait right there by the beer cooler, and don't say a word to anybody, not yet." They were willingly enough, huddled together as they passed through the swinging door. Ollie killed the generator, and just as the lights started to fail, I saw a quilted rug, the sort of thing movers use to pad breakable things, flopped over a stack of returnable soda bottles. I reached up and I grabbed it for Billy. There was the shuffling, blundering sound of Ollie coming out of the generator compartment. Like the great many overweight men, his breathing had a slightly heavy wheezing sound. "David?" His voice wavered a little. "You still here?" "Right here, Ollie." You want to watch out for all those bleach cartons." "Yeah." I guided him with my voice, and in 30 seconds or so he reached out of the dark and gripped my shoulder. He gave a long, trembling sigh. "Christ, let's get out of here," I said. I could smell the Rolaids as he always chewed on oh my God, the Rolaids he always chewed on his breath. "This dark is bad." "It is," I said, "but hang tight. Hang tight a minute, Ollie. I wanted to talk to you, and I didn't want the others two fuckheads listening." "Dave?" They didn't twist Norm's arm. "You ought to remember that. Norm was a kid, and they weren't. But never mind, that's over. We've got to tell them, Ollie. The people in the market." "And if they panic?" Ollie's voice was doubtful. "Maybe they will, and maybe they won't. But it will make them think twice about going out, which is what most of them want to do." "Why shouldn't they? Most of them would have people they left at home. I do myself." "We have to make them understand. They're We have to make them understand." Just lost you. "We have to make them understand that they're risking what they're risking if they go out there." His hand was gripping my arm. "All right." My arm hard. "All right," he said. "Yes, I just keep asking myself. All those tentacles. Like a squid or something." "David, were they hooked to? What were they hooked to? What were those tentacles hooked to?" "I don't know. But I don't want those two telling on their own. That would start a panic. Let's go." I looked around and after a minute or two, located the thin line of vertical light between the swing doors. We started to shuffle toward it, weary of scattered cartons, one of Ollie's pudgy hands clasped around my forearm. It occurred to me that all of us had lost our flashlights. As we reached the doors, Ollie said flatly, "What we saw? It's impossible, David. You know that, don't you?" Even if a van from a Boston seaquarium drove out back and dumped one of those gigantic squids in 20,000 leagues under the sea, it would die. It would just die. Yes, I said. That's right. So what happened, huh? What happened? What is that damn mist? Ollie, I don't know. So we went out. Sorry. Part 5. An argument with Norton, a discussion near the beer cooler, and verification. Jim had his good buddy Myron. Oh, okay. It tells you each thing that's going to happen. Jim and his good buddy Myron were just outside the doors, each with a Budweiser in his fist. I looked at Billy, saw he was still asleep, and covered him with the rug-like mover's mat. He moved a little, muttered something, and then lay still again. I looked at my watch. It was 12:15 p.m. It seemed utterly impossible. It felt as if at least 5 hours had passed since I'd first gone in there to look for something to cover him with. But the whole thing, from first to last, had only taken about 35 minutes. I went back to where Ollie stood with Jim and Myron. What? Stop it. Ollie had taken a beer and he offered me one. I took it and gulped down half the can at once. As I had that morning cutting wood, it bucked me up a little. Jim was Jim Grondin. Myron's last name was LaFleur, I guess. That had its comic side, all right. Myron the Flower. LaFleur. Myron the Flower had drying blood on his lips, chin, and neck. And cheek, I mean. Lips, chin, and cheek. The eye with the mouse under it was already swelling up. The girl in the cranberry-colored sweatshirt walked by aimlessly and gave Myron a cautious look. I could have told her that Myron was only dangerous to teenage boys intent on proving their manhood, but saved my breath. After all, Ollie was right. They had only been doing what they thought was best, although in a blind, fearful way rather than in any real common interest. And now, no, back up. And now I needed them to do what I thought was best. I didn't think that would be a problem. They had both had the stuffing knocked out of them. Neither, especially Myron the Flower, was going to be good for anything for some time to come. Something that had been in their eyes when they were fixing to send Norm out to unplug the exhaust vent had gone now. Sorry, I had to. Their peckers were no longer up. We're going to have to tell these people something, I said. Jim opened his mouth to protest. Ollie and I will leave out any part you and Myron had in sending Norm out there. If you'll back up what he and I say about what got him. Sure, Jim said, pitifully eager. Sure, if we don't tell people, might go out there. If you don't tell, people might go out there. Like that woman who... He wiped his hand across his mouth and then drank more beer quickly. Christ, what a mess. David, Ollie said. What? He stopped, then made himself go on. What if they get in? The tentacles. How could they? Jim asked. You guys shut the door. Sure, Ollie said. But the whole front wall of this place is plate glass. The elevator shot my stomach down about 20 floors. I had known that. But had somehow been successful in ignoring it. Dry mouth. Ugh. Had somehow been successful ignoring it. I looked over where Billy lay asleep. I thought of those tentacles swarming over Norm. I thought about I thought about that happening to Billy. Plate glass, my only flower whispered. Jesus Christ, in a chariot-driven sidecar. I left the three of them standing by the cooler, and each working a second can of beer, and went looking for Brent Norton. I found him in the sober side conversation with Bud Brown at Register 2. A pair of them, Norton with his styled gray hair and his elderly stud good looks, Brown with his dour New England fizz, looked like something out of a New York cartoon. As many as 2 dozen people milled restlessly in the place between the end of the checkout lanes and the long show window. A lot of them were lined up at the glass, looking out into the mist. I was again reminded of the people that congregate at the building site. At a building site, Miss Carmody was seated on a stationary conveyor belt of one of the checkout lanes, smoking a parliament in a one-step at a time filter. Her eyes measured me, found me wanting, and passed on. She looked as if she might be dreaming awake. Brent, I said. David, where did you go off to? Christ, that's what I'd like to talk to you about. There are people back at the cooler drinking beer, Brown said grimly. He sounded like a man announcing that X-rated movies had been shown at the deacon's party. I can see them in the security mirror. Has simply got to stop. Brent? Excuse me for a minute, would you, Mr. Brown? Certainly. He folded his arms across his chest and stared grimly up into the cervix mirror. It is going to stop. I can promise you that. Norton and I headed toward the beer cooler in the far corner of the store, walking past the housewares and notions. I glanced back over my shoulder, noticing uneasily how the wooden beam framing the tall, rectangular sections of window had buckled and twisted and splintered. And one of the windows wasn't even whole. I remembered. A pie-shaped chunk of glass had fallen out of the upper corner at an instant of that queer thump. Perhaps we could stuff it with cloth or something. Maybe a bunch of $3.59 lady tops I had noticed near the wine. My thoughts broke off abruptly, and I had to put the back of my hand over my mouth, as if stifling a burp. What I was really stifling was the rancid flood of horrified giggles that wanted to escape me at the thought of stuffing a bunch of shirts into a hole to keep all those tentacles that had carried Norton away. I had seen one of those tentacles, the smaller one, squeeze a bag of dog food until it simply ruptured it. David, are you okay? Huh? Your face. You look like you had seen a good idea or a bloody awful one. Something hit me then. Brent, what happened to that man who came in raving about something in the mist? Getting John Lee Proven? The guy with the nosebleed? Yeah, him. He passed out, and Mr. Brown brought him around to some smelling salts from the first aid kit. Why? Did he say anything else when he woke up? He started in on that hallucination. Mr. Brown conducted him to the office. He was frightening some of the women. He seemed happy enough to go. Something about the glass. When Mr. Brown said there was only one small window in the manager's office, and that it was reinforced with wire, he seemed happy enough to go, and I presume he's still there. What we are talking about is no hallucination. No, of course it is. And that thud we felt? No, but David. He's scared, I kept reminding myself. David blew up at him. You've treated yourself to one blow up this morning, and that's enough. Oh, I need to. If something I want my husband to grab, and now that I'm thinking about it, I need to write him and ask to bring something home. What? You didn't consent to your image being used for anything, nor your words. It was an interview, nothing more. They are not allowed to edit it. Okay. Now, back to my husband. What? I don't know what you want besides the fact that you're going to bark at that. You be willing to bring home a bag of blow pops? And maybe a bag of chocolate, if they have it? I want blow pops. Damn it. I might have to go in a second to see what she needs. He's scared, I kept reminding myself. Don't blow up at him. You've treated yourself to one blow up this morning, and that's enough. Don't blow up at him just because this is the way he was during that stupid property line dispute. First patronizing, then sarcastic, and finally, when it came clear he was going to lose, ugly. When it was going to lose, ugly. Don't blow up at him because you're going to need him. He may not be able to start his own chainsaw, but he looks like the father figure of the Western world. And if he tells people not to panic, they won't. So don't blow up at him. You see those double doors up there beyond the beer cooler? He looked, frowning. Isn't one of those men drinking beer with the other manager, Weeks? If Brown sees that, I can promise you that man will be looking for a job very soon. Brent, will you listen to me? He glanced back at me absently. What were you saying, David? I'm sorry. No, not as sorry as he's going to be. Do you see those doors? Yes, of course I do. What about them? They give on the storage area that runs all the way along the west face of the building. Billy fell asleep, and I went back there to see if I could find something to cover him up with. I told him everything, only leaving out the argument about whether or not Norm should have gone out at all. I told him what had come in, and finally, what had gone out, screaming. Brent Norton refused to believe it. No, he refused to even entertain it. I took him over to Jim, Ollie, and Myron. All three of them verified the story, although Jim and Myron, the flower, were well on their way to getting drunk. Again, Norton refused to believe, or even to entertain it. He simply balked. No, he said, no, no, no. Forgive me, gentlemen, but it's completely ridiculous. Either you're having me on, he patronized us with his gleaming smile to show that he could take a joke as well as the next fellow, or you're suffering from some form of group hypnosis. My temper rose again, and I controlled it with difficulty. I don't think that I'm ordinarily a quick-tempered man, but these weren't ordinary circumstances. I had Billy to think about, and what was happening, and what had already happened to Stephanie. Those things were constantly gnawing at the back of my mind. All right, I said. Let's go back there. There's a chunk of tentacle on the floor. The door cut it off when it came down. And you can hear them. They're rustling all over the door. It sounds like the wind in ivy. No, he said calmly. What? I really did believe I had misheard him. What did you say? I said, no, I'm not going back there. The joke has gone far enough. Brent, I swear to you, it's no joke. Of course it is, he snapped. His eyes ran over Jim and Myron, rested briefly on Ollie Weeks, who held his glance with calm impassivity. And the last came back to me. It's what you locals probably call a real belly buster, right, David? Brent, look. No, you look. His voice began to rise toward a courtroom shout. It carried very, very well, and several of the people who were wandering around, edgy and aimless, looked over to see what was going on. Norton jabbed his finger at me as he spoke. It's a joke. It's a banana skin, and I'm the guy that's supposed to slip on it. None of you people are exactly crazy about out-of-towners, am I right? You all pretty much stick together. The way it happened when I hauled you into court to get what was rightfully mine, you won that one, all right. Why not? Your father was a famous artist, and it's your town. I only pay my taxes and spend my money here. He was no longer performing, hectoring us with the with the trained courtroom shout. He was nearly screaming and on the verge of losing all control. Ollie Weeks turned and walked away, clutching his beer. Myron and his friend Jim were staring at Norton with frank amazement. Am I supposed to go back there and look at some 98-cent rubber joke novelty while these two hicks stand around and laugh their asses off? Hey, you want to watch who you're calling a hick? Myron said. I'm glad that tree fell on your boathouse. If you want to know the truth, glad. Norton was grinning savagely at me. Stove it in properly well, didn't it? Stove it in pretty well, didn't it? Fantastic. Now get out of my way. He tried to push past me. I grabbed him by the arm and threw him against the beer cooler. A woman cawed in surprise. 2 six-packs of Bud fell over. You dig out your ears and listen, Brent. There are lives at stake here. My kid is not the least of them. So you listen, or I swear I'll knock the shit out of you. Go ahead, Norton said, still grinning with a kind of insane palsied bravado. His eyes, bloodshot and wide, bulged from their sockets. Show everyone how big and brave you are, beating a man with a heart condition who is old enough to be your father. Sock him anyway, Jim exclaimed. Fuck his heart condition. I don't even think a cheap New York shyster like him has got a heart. You keep out of it, I said to Jim, and then put my face down to Norton's. I was kissing distance, if that had been what I had in mind. The cooler was off, but it was still radiating a chill. Stop throwing up sand. You know damn well I'm telling the truth. I know no such thing, he panted. If it was another time and place, I'd let you get away with it. I don't care how scared you are. God damn it, this thing is pulling my hair. And I'm not keeping score. I'm scared too. But I need you, God damn it. Does that get through? I need you. Let me go. I grabbed him by the shirt and shook him. Don't you understand anything? People are going to start leaving and walk right out there, right into that thing out there. For Christ's sakes, don't you understand? Let me go. Not until you come back there with me and see for yourself. I told you no. It's all a trick, a joke. I'm not as stupid as you take me for. Then I'll haul you back there myself. I grabbed him by the shoulder and the scruff of the neck. The seam of his shirt under one arm tore with a soft, purring sound. I dragged him toward the double doors. Norton let out a wretched scream. A knot of people, 15 or 18, had gathered, but they kept their distance. None showed any signs of wanting to interfere. Help me, Norton cried. His eyes bulged behind his glasses. His styled hair had gone awry again, sticking up in the same 2 little tufts beyond his ears. People shuffled their feet and watched. What are you screaming for? I said in his ear. It's just a joke, right? That's why I took you to town when you asked to come, and why I trusted you to cross Billy in the parking lot. Because I had this handy fog all manufactured. I rented a fog machine from Hollywood. It cost me $15,000 and another $18,000 to ship it. All so I could play a joke on you. Stop bullshitting yourself and open your eyes. Let me go, Norton bawled. We were almost to the doors. Here. What is this? What are you doing? It was Brown. He bustled and elbowed his way through the crowd of watchers. Make him let me go, Norton said hoarsely. He's crazy. No, he's not crazy. I wish he was, but he isn't. That was Ollie, and I could have blessed him. He came around the aisle behind us and stood there facing Brown. Brown's eyes dropped to the beer Ollie was holding. You're drinking, he said, and his voice was surprised, but not totally devoid of pleasure. You'll lose your job for this. Come on, Bud, I said, letting go of Norton. This is no ordinary situation. Regulations don't change, Brown said smugly. I'll see the company hears of this. That's my responsibility. Norton, meanwhile, had skirted away and stood at some distance, trying to straighten his shirt and smooth back his hair. His eyes darted between Brown and me nervously. Hey, Ollie cried suddenly, raising his voice and producing a bass thunder I never would have suspected from this large but soft and unassuming man. Hey, everybody in the store, you want to come up? You want to come back here and hear this? It concerns all of you. He looked at me levelly, ignoring Brown altogether. Am I doing all right? Fine. People began to gather. The original knot of spectators to my argument with Norton had doubled, then trebled. There's something you all had better know, Ollie began. You put your beer down right now, Brown said. Oh, you shut up right now, I said. and took a step toward him. Brown took a compensatory step back. I don't know what some of you think you are doing, he said, but I can tell you it's going to be reported to the Federal Foods Company. All of it. And I want you to understand there may be charges. His lips drew nervously back from his yellow teeth, and I could feel sympathy for him, just trying to cope. That was all he was doing, as Norton was by imposing a mental gag order on himself. Myron and Jim had tried by turning the whole thing into a macho charade. If the generator could be fixed, the mist would blow over. That was Brown's way. He was protecting the store. Then you go ahead and take down the names, I said. But please, don't talk. I'll take down plenty of names, he responded. Yours will be head on the list. You bohemian. Mr. David Drayton has got something to tell you, Ollie said, and I think you'd better listen up, in case you were planning on going home. So I told them what had happened pretty much as I told Norton. There was some laughter at first, then a deepening uneasiness as I finished. It's a lie, you know, Norton said. His voice tried for hard emphasis and overshot into stridency. This was the man I'd first told, hoping to enlist his credibility. What a balls up. Of course it's a lie, Brown agreed. It's lunacy. Where do you suppose those tentacles came from, Mr. Drayton? I don't know. And at this point, that's not even a very important question. They're here. I suspect they came out of a few of those beer cans. That's what I suspect. This got some appreciative laughter. It was silenced by the strong, rusty, hinged voice of Mrs. Carmody. Death! She screamed, and those who had been laughing quickly sobered. Sobered. She marched into the center of the rough circle that had formed, her canary pants seeming to give off a light of their own, her huge purse swinging against one elephantine thigh. Her black eyes glanced arrogantly around, as sharp and balefully sparkling as a magpie's. Two good-looking girls of about 16, with Camp Woodlands written on the back of their white nylon shirts, shrank away from her. You listen, but you don't hear. You hear, but you don't believe. Which one of you wants to go outside and see for himself? Her eyes swept them, and then fell on me. And just what do you propose to do about it, Mr. David Drayton? What do you think you can do about it? She grinned, skull-like above her canary outfit. It's the end, I tell you. The end of everything. It's the last times. The moving finger of writ, not in fire, but in lines of mist. The earth has opened and swallowed forth its abominations. Can't you make her shut up? One of the teenage girls burst out. She was beginning to cry. She's scaring me. Are you scared, dearie? Mrs. Carmody asked and turned on her. You aren't scared now, no. But when the foul creatures, the imp, has loosened upon the face of the earth, come for you. That's enough now, Mrs. Carmody. Carmody, Ollie said, taking her arm. That's just fine. You let go of me. It's the end, I tell you. It's death. Death! It's a pile of shit, a man in a fishing hat and glasses said disgustedly. No, sir, Myron spoke up. I know it sounds like something out of a dope dream, but it's the flat-out truth. I saw it myself. I did too, Jim said. And me, Ollie chipped in. He was succeeding in quieting Mrs. Carmody, at least for the time being, but she stood close by, clutching her big purse and grinning her crazy grin. No one wanted to stand close to her. They muttered among themselves, not liking the corroboration. Several of them looked back at the big plate glass windows in an uneasy, speculative way. I was glad to see it. Lies, Norton said. You people all lie each other up, that's all. What you're suggesting is totally beyond belief, Brown said. We don't have to stand here chewing it over, I told him. Come back to the storage area with me, take a look and listen. Customers are not allowed in the... Bud, Ollie said. Go with him. Let's settle this. All right, Brown said. Mr. Drayton, let's get this foolishness over with. We pushed through the double doors into the darkness. The sound was unpleasant, perhaps evil. Brown felt it too. For all his hard-headed Yankee manner, His hand clenched my arm immediately. His breath caught for a moment and then resumed more harshly. It was a low whispering sound from the direction of the loading door, an almost caressing sound. I swept around gently with one foot and finally struck one of the flashlights. I bent down, got it, and turned it on. Brown's face was tightly drawn, and he hadn't even seen them. He was only hearing them. But I had seen, and I could imagine them twisting and climbing over the corrugated steel surface of the door like living vines. I am going to stop there. I will be right back and we will continue reading. I'm going to take care of my dogs because they're being brats. What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you seriously picking them up? Why? You need to go outside. It's not your food. Go. Outside. Come on. Out. Go. Go. That's too funny. Oh, that is way too funny. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. I needed to take my doggies out. All right, let's see where we are. Do 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 do. Climbing over the corrugated steel surface of the door like living vines. What do you think now? Totally beyond belief? Brown licked his lips and looked at the littered, confused fusion of boxes and bags. They did this? Some of it, most of it. Come over here. He came reluctantly. I spotted the flashlight on the shriveled and curled up section of tentacle, still laying in by the push broom. Brown bent toward it. Don't touch it, I said. It may still be alive. He straightened up quickly. I picked up the broom by the bristles and probed the tentacle. Third or fourth poke caused it to unclench sluggishly and reveal two whole suckers and a ragged segment of a third. Then the fragment coiled up and with muscular speed and still lay there. Brown made a gagging, disgusted sound. Seen enough? Yes, he said. Let's get out of here. He followed the bobbing light back to the double doors and pushed through them. All the faces turned toward us, and the hum of conversation died. Norton's face was like old cheese. Miss Carmody's black eyes glinted. Ollie was drinking beer. His face was still running with trickles of perspiration, although it had gotten rather chilly in the market. The two girls, with Camp Woodlands on their shirts, were huddled together like young horses before a thunderstorm. Eyes. So many eyes I could paint them. I thought with a chill. No faces, only eyes in the gloom. I could paint them, but no one would believe they were real. Bud folded his long-fingered hands primly in front of him. People, he said, it appears we have a problem of some magnitude here. Part 6. Further discussion. Mrs. Carmody. Fornifications. What happened to the Flat Earth Society. The next 4 hours passed in a kind of dream. There was a long and semi-hysterical discussion following Brown's confirmation, and maybe the discussion wasn't as long as it seemed. Maybe it was just the grim necessity of people chewing over the same information. Ooh, there are like 60 pages left. Trying to see it from every possible point of view, working it the way a dog works a bone, trying to get it at the marrow. It was a slow coming to belief. You see the same thing at the New England town meeting in March. There was the Flat Earth Society, headed by Norton. They were a vocal minority of about 10 who believed none of it. Norton pointed out over and over again that there were only 4 witnesses to the bag boy being carried off by what he called the tentacles from Planet X. It was a good laugh for the first time, but it wore thin quickly. Norton, in his increasing agitation, seemed not to notice. He added that he personally did not trust one of the 4. He further pointed out that 50% of the witnesses were now hopelessly inebriated. That was unquestionably true. Jim and Myron LaFlower, with the entire beer cooler and wine rack at their disposal, were abysmally shit-faced. Considering what had happened to Norm and their part in it, I don't blame them. They would sober off all too soon. Ollie continued to drink steadily, ignoring Brown's protests. After a while, Brown gave up, contenting himself with the occasional baleful threat about the company. He didn't seem to realize that Federal Foods, Inc., with its stores in Drayton, North Windham, and Portland, might not even exist anymore. For all we knew, the Eastern Seaboard might no longer exist. Ollie drank steadily, but didn't get drunk. He was sweating it out as rapidly as he could put it in. At last, as our discussion with the Flat Earthers was becoming acrimonious, Ollie spoke up. If you don't believe it, Mr. Norton, that's fine. I'll tell you what to do. You go on out the front door and walk around to the back. There's a great big pile of returnable beer and soda bottles there. Norm and Buddy and I put them out this morning. You bring back a couple of those bottles so we know you really went back there. You do that, and I'll personally take my shirt off and eat it." Norton began to bluster. Ollie cut him off with the same soft, even voice. "I tell you, you're not doing anything but damage talking the way you are. There's people here that want to go home and make sure their families are okay. My sister and her year-old daughter are at home in Naples right now. I'd like to check on them, sure. But if people start believing you and try to go home, what happened to Norm is going to happen to them." He didn't convince Norm, but he convinced some of the learners and fence sitters. It wasn't what he said so much as it was his eyes, his haunted eyes. I think Norton's sanity hinged on not being convinced, or he thought it did. But he didn't take Ollie up on his offer to bring back a sampling of returnables from out back. None of them did. They weren't ready to go out, at least not yet. He and his little group of flat earthers, reduced by one or two now, went as far away as the rest of us as they could get, from the rest of us as they could get, over by the prepared meats case. One of them kicked my sleeping son in his legs as he went past, waking him up. I went over and Billy clung to my neck. When I tried to put him down, he clung tighter and said, "Don't do that, Daddy, please." I found a shopping cart and put him in the baby seat. He looked very big in there. It would have been comical, except for his pale face, his dark hair brushed across his forehead, just above his eyebrows, his woeful eyes. He probably hadn't been up in the baby seat of the shopping cart for as long as 2 years. Those little things slide by you. You don't realize it first. And when what has changed finally comes to you, it's always a nasty shock. Meanwhile, with the flat earthers having withdrawn, the argument had found another lightning rod. This time it was Mrs. Carmody, and understandably enough, she stood alone. In the faded, dismal light, she was witch-like in her blazing canary pants, her bright rayon blouse, her armloads of clacking junk jewelry, copper, tortoiseshell, adamantite, and her thyroidal purse. Her parchment face was grooved with strong vertical lines. Yes. With strong vertical lines. Her fizzy gray hair was yanked flat with 3 horned combs, twisted in the back. Her mouth was a line of knotted rope. There is no defense against the will of God. This has been coming. I have seen the signs. There are those here that I have told, but there are none so blind as those who will not see. Well, what are you saying? What are you proposing? Matt Hatlin broke in impatiently. He was the town selectman, although he didn't look the part now, in his yachtsman's caps and saggy seated Bermudas. He was sipping at a beer. A great many men were doing it now. Bud Brown had given up protesting, but he was indeed taking names, keeping a rough tab on everyone he could. "Proposing," Mrs. Carmody echoed, wheeling toward Hatlin. "Proposing? Why, I'm proposing that you prepare to meet your God, Michael Hatlin." She gazed around at all of us. "Prepare to meet your God." "Prepare to meet shit," Myron LaFlowers said in a drunken snarl from the beer cooler. "Old woman, I believe your tongue must be hung in the middle so it can run on both ends." There was a rumble of agreement. Billy looked around nervously, and I slipped an arm around his shoulders. "I'll have my say," she cried, her upper lip curled back, revealing snaggle teeth that were yellow with nicotine. I thought of the dusty stuffed animals in her shop, drinking internally at the mirror that served as their creek. Doubters will doubt to the end, yet the monstrosity did drag the poor boy away. Things in the mist, every abomination out of a bad dream, eyeless freaks, pallid horrors. Do you doubt? Then go out. Go on out and say howdy-do. Mrs. Carmody, you'll have to stop, I said. You're scaring my boy. The man with the little girl echoed the sentiment. She, all plump legs and scabby knees, had hidden her face against her father's stomach and put her hands over her ears. Big Bill wasn't crying, but he was close. There's only one chance, Mrs. Carmody said. And what's that, ma'am? Matt Hatlin asked politely. A sacrifice, Miss Carmody said. She seemed to grin in the gloom. A blood sacrifice. Blood sacrifice. The words hung there, slowly turning, even now, when I know better. I tell myself that then what she meant was someone's pet dog. There were a couple of them trotting around the market in spite of the regulations against them. Even now I tell myself that. She looked like some crazed remnant of New England Puritanism in the gloom. But I suspect that something deeper and darker than mere Puritanism motivated her. Puritanism has its own dark grandfather, old Adam with bloody hands. She opened her mouth to say something more, and a small, neat man in red pants and natty sports shirt.
Do you want this one?
No, thank you. You eat.
Because I might have made 4.
Well, then eat it. Watch your shows and eat it.
Okay, are you sure?
As long as you're hungry, go.
Are you going to drink your...
Yes, I am. Have some water. And Natty's sports shirt struck her open-handed across the face. His hair was parted with ruler evenness on the left. He wore glasses. He also wore the unmistakable look of a summer tourist. You shut up that bad talk, he told her softly and tonelessly. Mrs. Carmody put her hand to her mouth and then held it out to us.
Mom?
A wordless accusation.
Do you remember Bose TV that came with the remote?
Mm-hmm.
We can use Bose TV
remote. Our TV? No, we can't. It doesn't go to ours. So please, just use your phone. We'll find the remote soon enough.
I might have left my phone upstairs.
A wordless accusation. There was blood on the palm, but her black eyes seemed to dance with mad glee. You had it coming, a woman cried out. I would have done it myself. They'll get a hold of you, Miss Carmody said, showing us her bloody palm. The trickle of blood was now running down one of her wrinkles, from her mouth to her chin, like a droplet of rain down a gutter. Not today, maybe. Tonight. Tonight when the dark comes. They'll come with the night and take someone else. With the night they'll come. You'll hear them coming, creeping and crawling. And when they come, you'll beg for Mother Carmody to show you what to do. The man in the red pants raised his hand slowly. You come on and hit me, she whispered and grinned her bloody grin at him. His hand wavered. Hit me if you dare. His hand dropped. Miss Carmody walked away by herself. Then Billy did begin to cry, hiding his face against me as the little girl had done with her father. I want to go home, he said. I want to see my mommy. I comforted him as best I could, which probably wasn't very well. The talk finally turned into less frightening and destructive channels. The plate glass windows, the market's obvious weak point, were mentioned. Mike Hatlin, asked for other entrances there were, and Ollie and Brown quickly ticked them off. 2 loading doors in addition to the one Norm had opened. The main in and out doors, the windows in the manager's office, thick reinforced glass, securely locked. Talking about these things had a paradoxical effect. It made the danger seem more real, but at the same time made us feel better. Even Billy felt it. He asked if he could go get a candy bar. I told him it would be all right so long as he didn't go near the big windows.
Can you sign into a coop? Just for a moment.
I know I messed it up. Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. As long as he didn't go near the big windows. When he was out of earshot, a man named Mike Hatland said, "Okay, what are we going to do about those windows? The old lady may be as crazy as a bedbug, but she could be right about something moving after dark." "Maybe the fog will blow over by then," a woman said. "Maybe," a man said, "but maybe not." "Any ideas?" I asked Bud and Ollie. "Hold on a sec," the man near Hatland said. "I'm Dan Miller from Lynn, Massachusetts. You don't know me, no reason why you should, but I got a place in Highland Lake. Bought it just this year. Got held up for it, is more like it, but I had to have it." There were a few chuckles. "Anyway, I saw a whole pile of fertilizer and lawn food bags down there, 25-pound sacks, most of them. We could put them up like sandbags, leave loopholes to look through." Now more people were nodding and talking excitedly. I almost said something, then held it back. Miller was right. Putting those bags up could do no harm and might do some good. But my mind went back to the tentacle squeezing the dog food bag. I thought that one of the big tentacles could probably do the same for 25-pound bag of Green Acres lawn food or Vigoro. Ugh. But the sermon on that wouldn't get us out or improve anyone's mood. People began to break up, talking about getting it done, and Miller yelled, "Hold it, hold it! Let's thrash this out while we're all together." They came back, a loose congregation of 50 or 60 people in the corner, formed by the beer cooler, the storage doors, and the left end of the meat cooler, where Mr. McVeigh always seems to put the things no one wants, like sweetbreads and Scotch eggs and sheep's brains and head cheese. Billy wove his way through them with a 5-year-old's unconscious agility in the world of giants and held up a Hershey bar. "Want this, Daddy?" "Thanks." I took it and tasted sweet. It tasted sweet and good. "This is probably a stupid question," Miller resumed, "but we ought to fill in the blanks. Anyone got any firearms?" There was a pause. People looked around at each other and shrugged. An old man with grizzled white hair, who introduced himself as Ambrose Cornell, said he had a shotgun in the trunk of his car. "I'll try for it if you want." Ollie said, "Right now, I don't think that would be a good idea, Mr. Cornell." Cornell grunted. "Right now, neither do I, son, but I thought I ought to make the offer." "Well, I didn't really think so," Dan Miller said, "but I thought—" "Wait, hold it a minute," a woman said. It was the lady in the cranberry-colored sweatshirt and the dark green slacks. She had sandy brown hair and a good figure, a very pretty young woman. She opened her purse. From it she produced a medium-sized pistol. The crowd made an awing sound. Ah-ing sound. And if they had just seen as oh my God, as if they had just seen a magician do a particularly fine trick. The woman, who had been blushing, blushed that much the harder. She rooted in her purse again and brought out a box of Smith & Wesson ammunition. "I'm Amanda Dumfries," she said to Miller. "This gun, my husband's idea. He thought I should have it for protection. I carried it unloaded for 2 years. Is your husband here, ma'am?" "No. He's in New York on business. He's gone on business a lot. That's why he wanted me to carry the gun." "Well," Miller said, "if you can use it, you ought to keep it. What is it, 38? Bum, 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 bum. What is it, a 38? "Yes, and I've never fired it in my life except on a target range once." Miller took the gun, fumbled around, got the cylinder to open after a few moments. He checked to make sure that it was not loaded. "Okay," he said. "We got a gun. Who shoots good? I sure don't." People glanced at each other. No one said anything at first, and then, reluctantly, Ollie said, "I target shoot quite a lot. I have a Colt 45 and a Llama 25. "You?" Brown said. "Huh! You'll be too drunk to see by dark." Ollie said very clearly, "Why don't you just shut up and write down your names?" Brown goggled at him, opened his mouth, and decided wisely, I think, to shut it again. It's yours, Miller said, blinking a little at the exchange. He handed it over, and Wally checked it again, more professionally. He put the gun in his right pocket, right into his right front pants pocket, and slipped the cartridge box into his breast pocket, where it made a bulge like a pack of cigarettes. Then he leaned back against the cooler, round face still trickling sweat, and cracked a fresh beer. The sensation that I was seeing a totally unsuspected Ollie Weeks persisted. Thank you, Mrs. Dumfries. Dumfries. Yeah, Dumfries. It's not Dumfries. It looks like Dumfries, but it's Dumfries, Miller said. Don't mention it, she said. And I thought fleetingly that if I were her husband and proprietor of those green eyes and that full figure, I might not travel so much. Giving your wife a gun could be seen as a ludicrously symbolic act. This may be silly, too, Miller said, turning back to Brown with his clipboard and Ollie with his beer, but there ain't anything like flamethrowers in this place, are there? Aw, shit, Buddy Ellen Eagleton said, and then went as red as Amanda Dumfries had done. What is it? Mike Hatlin asked. Well, until last week we had a whole case of those little blowtorches, the kind you use around your house to solder leaky pipes or mend your exhaust systems or whatever. You remember those, Mr. Brown? Brown nodded, looking sour. Sold out? Miller asked. No, they didn't go at all. We only sold 3 or 4 and sent the rest of the case back. What a pisser. What a shame. Blushing so deeply he was almost purple, Buddy Eagleton retired into the background again. We had matches, of course, and salt. Someone said vaguely that he had heard salt has a thing to put on bloodsuckers and things like that, and all kinds of cedar mops and long-handled brooms. Most of the people continued to look heartened. Ugh. And Jim and Myron were too blotzo to sound a dissenting tone. But I met Ollie's eyes and saw a calm hopelessness in them that was worse than fear. He and I had seen the tentacles. The idea of throwing salt on them or trying to fend them off with the handles of cedar mops was funny in a ghastly way. Mike, Miller said, why don't you crew this little adventure? I want to talk to Ollie and Dave here for a minute. Glad to, Hatlin clapped Dan Miller on the shoulder. Somebody had to take charge, and you did a good job. You did it good. Welcome to town. Does this mean I get a kickback on my taxes? Miller asked. He was a banty little guy with red hair that was receding. He looked like the sort of guy you can't help liking on short notice, and just maybe the kind of guy you can't help not liking after he's been around for a while. The kind of guy who knows how to do everything better than you do. No way, Hatlin said, laughing. Hatlin walked off. Miller glanced down at my son. Don't worry about Billy, I said. Man, I've never been so worried in my whole life, Miller said. No, Ollie agreed and dropped an empty into the beer cooler. He got a fresh one and opened it. There was a soft hiss of escaping gas. I got to look at the way you two glanced at each other, Miller said. I finished my Hershey bar and got a beer to wash it down with. Tell you what I think, Miller said. We ought to get half a dozen people to wrap some of those mop handles with cloth and then tie them down with twine. Then I think we ought to get a couple of those cans of charcoal lighter fluid already. If we cut the tops right off the cans, we can have some torches pretty quick. I nodded. That was good. Almost surely not good enough, not if you had seen Norm dragged out, but it was better than salt. That would give them something to think about at least, Ollie said. Miller's lips pressed together. That bad, huh? He said. That bad, Ollie agreed, and worked his beer. By 4:30 that afternoon, the sacks of fertilizer and lawn food were in place, and the big windows were blocked off except for narrow loopholes. A watchman had been placed at each of these, and beside each watchman was a tin of charcoal lighter fluid with the top cut off and a supply of mop-handled torches. There were 5 loopholes, and Dan Miller had arranged a rotation of sentries for each one. When 4:30 came around, I was sitting on a pile of bags at one of the loopholes. Billy at my side. We were looking out into the mist. Just beyond the window was a red bench where people sometimes waited for their rides with their groceries beside them. Beyond that was the parking lot. The mist swirled slowly, thick and heavy. There was moisture in it, but how dull it seemed and gloomy. Just looking at it made me feel gutless and lost. "Daddy, do you know what's happening?" Billy asked. "No, hon," I said. He fell silent for a bit, looking at his hands, which lay limply in his lap of his tough-skin jeans. "Why doesn't somebody come and rescue us?" he asked finally. The state police or the FBI or someone?" "I don't know. Do you think Mom's okay?" "Billy, I just don't know," I said, and put an arm around him. "I want her awful bad," Billy said, struggling with tears. "I'm sorry about the times I was bad to her." "Billy," I said, and had to stop. I could taste salt in my throat. My voice started to tremble. "Will it be over?" Billy asked. "Daddy, will it?" "I don't know," I said. And he put his face in the hollow of my shoulder, and I held the back of his head, felt the delicate curve of his skull just around the thick growth of his hair. I found myself remembering the evening of my wedding day, watching Steph take off the simple brown dress she had changed into after the ceremony. She had had a big purple bruise on one hip from running into the side of the door the day before. I remembered looking at the bruise and thinking, when she got that, she was still Stephanie Stepanek, and feeling something like wonder. Then we had made love, and outside it was spitting snow from a dull gray December sky. Billy was crying. "Shh, Billy, shh," I said, rocking his head against me. But he went on crying. It was a sort of crying that only mothers know how to fix right. Premature night came inside the Federal Foods. Miller and Hatlin and Bud Brown handed out flashlights, the whole stack, about 20. Norton clamored loudly for them on behalf of his group and received 2. The lights bobbed here and there in the aisles like uneasy phantoms. I held Billy against me and looked out through the loophole. The milky, translucent quality of the light out there hadn't changed much. It was putting up the bags that had made the market so dark. Several times I thought I saw something, but it was only jumpiness. One of the others raised a hesitant false alarm. Billy saw Mrs. Truman again and went to her eagerly, even though she hadn't been over to sit for him all summer. She had one of the flashlights and handed it over to him amiably enough. Soon he was trying to write his name in light on the blank glass faces of the frozen food cases. She seemed as happy to see him as he was to see her. And in a little while they came over. Hattie Truman was a tall, thin woman with lovely red hair just beginning to streak gray. A pair of glasses hung from an ornamental chain, the sort, I believe, it is illegal for anyone except middle-aged women to wear on her breast. "Is Stephanie here, David?" he asked. "No, at home," she asked. "No, at home," she nodded. "Alan, too." "How long are you on watch here?" "Till 6. Have you seen anything?" "No, just the mist." "I'll keep Billy until 6 if you like." "Would you like that, Billy?" "Yes, please," he said, swinging the flashlight above his head in slow arcs and watching it play across the ceiling. "God will keep your Steffi and Alan too," Mrs. Truman said, and led Billy away by the hand. She spoke with serene sureness, but there was no conviction in her eyes. About 5:30, the sounds of excited argument rose near the back of the store. Someone jeered at something someone else had said, and someone, it was Buddy Eagleton, I think, shouted, "You're crazy if you go out there." Several of the flashlight beams pulled together at the center of the controversy, and they moved toward the front of the store. Mrs. Carmody's shrieking, derisive laugh split the gloom as abrasively as fingers drawn down a slate blackboard. Above the babble of voices came a boom of Norton's courtroom tenor. "Let us pass, please, let us pass." The man in the loophole next to mine left his place to see what the shouting was about. I decided to stay where I was. Whatever the concatenation, Lord, was, it was coming my way. "Please," Mr. Hatlin was saying, "please, let's talk this through." "There's nothing to talk about," Norton proclaimed. Now his face swam out of the gloom. It was determined and haggard and wholly wretched. He was holding one of the two flashlights allocated to the flat earthers. The corkscrewed tufts of hair still stuck up behind his ears like a cucklin's horns. He was at the head of the extremely small procession, 5 of the original 9 or 10. "We're going out," he said. "Don't stick to the craziness," Miller said. "Mike's right. We can talk it over, can't we? Mr. McVeigh is going to barbecue some chicken over the gas grill. We can all sit down and eat and just—" He got in Norton's way, and Norton gave him a push. Miller didn't like it. His face flushed and then set in a hard expression. "Do what you want, then," he said. "But you're as good as murdering these other people." With all that evenness of great resolve or unbreakable obsession, Norton said, "We'll send help back for you. One of his fellows murmured agreement, but another quietly slipped away. Now there was Norton and 4 others. Maybe that wasn't so bad. Christ himself could only find 12. "Listen," Matt Hatlin said. "Mr. Norton, Brent, at least stay for the chicken. Get some hot food inside you." "And give you a chance to go on talking? I've been in too many courtrooms to fall for that. You've psyched out half a dozen of my people already." "Your people," Hatlin almost groaned it. "Your people. Good Christ, what kind of talk is that? Their people. That's all. There is no game. This is no game, and it's surely not a courtroom. There are, for want of a better word, there are things out there. And what's the sense of getting yourself killed?" "Things, you say," Norton said, sounding superficially amused. "Where? You people have been on watch for a couple of hours now. Who's seen one?" "Well, out back in the—" "No, no, no," Norton said, shaking his head. "That ground has been covered, and we're going out." "No," someone whispered, and it echoed and spread, sounding like the rustle of dead leaves at dusk for an October evening. "No, no, no." "Will you restrain us?" a shrill voice asked. This was one of Norton's people, to use his word, an elderly lady wearing bifocals. "Will you restrain us?" The soft babble of negatives died away. "No," Mike said. "No, I don't think anyone will restrain you." I whispered in Billy's ear. He looked at me, startled and questioning. "Go on now," I said. "Be quick." He went. Norton ran his hands through his hair, a gesture as calculated as any ever made by a Broadway actor. I had liked him better pulling the cord of his chainsaw fruitlessly, cussing and thinking himself unobserved. I could not tell then, and I do not know any better now, if he believed in what he was doing or not. I think deep down that he knew what was going to happen. I think that the logic he had paid lip service to all his life turned on him. You better use tissue. I think deep down that he knew what was going to happen. I think that the logic he had paid lip service to all his life turned on him at the end like a tiger that has gone bad and mean. He looked around restlessly, seeming to wish that there was more to say. Then he led his 4 followers through one of the checkout lanes. In addition to the elderly woman, there was a chubby boy of about 20, a young girl, and a man in blue jeans wearing a golf cap tipped back on his head. Norton's eyes caught mine, widened a little, and then started to swing away. Brent, wait a minute, I said. I don't want to discuss it any further, certainly not with you. I know you don't. I just want to ask a favor. I looked around and saw Billy coming toward the checkouts at a run. What's that? Norton asked suspiciously as Billy came up and handed me a package done up in cellophane. Clothesline, I said. I was vaguely aware that everyone in the market was watching us now, loosely strung out on the other side of the cash registers and checkout lanes. It's a big package, 300 feet, so I wondered if you'd tie one end around your waist before you go out. I'll let it out, and when you feel it come up tight, just tie it around something. It doesn't matter what. A car handle would do. What in God's name for? It'll tell me you got at least 300 feet, I said. Something in his eyes flickered, but only momentarily. No, he said. I shrugged. Okay, good luck anyhow. Abruptly, the man in the golf cap said, I'll do it, mister. No reason not to. Norton swung on him, as if to say something sharp, and the man in the golf cap studied him calmly. There was nothing flickering in his eyes. He had made his decision, and there was simply no doubt in him. Norton saw it too and said nothing. Thanks, I said. I slipped the wrapping with my pocket knife, and the clothesline accordioned out in stiff loops. I found one loose end and tied it around Golf Cap's waist in a loose granny. He immediately untied it and cinched it tighter in a good, quick, sheet-bent knot. There was not a sound in the market. Norton shifted uneasily from foot to foot. You want to take my knife? I asked the man in the golf cap. I got one. He looked at me with the same calm contempt. You just see to paying out your line. If it binds up, I'll chuck her. Are we all ready? Norton asked, too loud. The chubby boy jumped as if he had been goosed. Getting no response, Norton turned to go. Brent, I said, and held out my hand. Good luck, man. He studied my hand as if it were dubious foreign object. Well, we'll send back help, he said firmly, and pushed through the outdoor. That thin, acrid smell came in again. The others followed him out. Mike Hatlin came down and stood beside me. Norton's party of 5 stood in the milky, slow-moving fog. Norton said something, and I should have heard it, but mist seemed to have an odd damping effect. I heard nothing but the sound of his voice and the 2 or 3 isolated syllables, like the voice on the radio heard from a distance. They moved off. Hatlin held the door a little way open. I paid out the clothesline, keeping as much slack in it as I could, mindful of the man's promise to chuck the rope if it bound him up. There was still not a sound. Billy stood beside me, motionless, but seeming to thrum with his own inner current. Again, there was that weird feeling that 5 of them did not so much disappear into the fog as become invisible. For a moment, their clothes seemed to stand alone, and then they were gone. You were not really impressed with the unnatural density of the mist until you saw people swallowed up in a space of seconds. I paid the line out. A quarter of it went, then half. It stopped going out for a moment. It went from a live thing to a dead one in my hands. I held my breath. Then it started to go out again. I paid it through my fingers, and suddenly remembered my father taking me to the Gregory Peck film of Moby Dick at the brookside. I think I smiled a little. 3/4 of the line was gone now. I could see the end of it lying beside one of Billy's feet. Then the rope stopped moving through my hands again. It lay motionless for perhaps 5 seconds, and then another 5 feet jerked out. Then suddenly, whipsawed violently to the left, twanging off the edge of the outdoor. 20 feet of rope suddenly paid out, moving a thin heat across my left palm. And from out of the mist, there came a high, wavering scream. It was impossible to tell the sex of the screamer. The rope whipsawed in my hands again and again. It skated across the space of the doorway to the right, and then back to the left, and a few more feet paid out, and then there was an ululating howl from out there that brought an answering moan from my son. Catlin stood aghast. His eyes were huge. One corner of his mouth turned down, trembling. The howl was abruptly cut off. There was no sound at all for what seemed like forever. Then the old lady cried out. This time there could be no doubt about who it was. "Get it off of me!" she screamed. Oh my lord, get it!" Then her voice was cut off too. Almost all of the rope abruptly ran out through my loosely closed fist, giving me a hotter burn this time. Then it went completely slack, and the sound came out of the mist, a thick, loud grunt that made all the spit in my mouth dry up. It was like no sound I'd ever heard, but the closest approximation might be a movie set in the African veld or the South American swamp. It was the sound of a big animal. It came again, low and tearing and savage. See if they need to go out, honey. Once more, and then it subsided to a series of low mutterings. Then it was completely gone. "Close the door," Amanda Dumfries said in a trembling voice. "Please." "In a minute," I said, and began to yank the line back in. It came out of the mist and piled up around my feet in untidy loops and snarls. About 3 feet from the end, a new white clothesline went barn red. The new white clothesline went barn red. "Death!" Miss Carmody screamed. "Death to go out there. Now do you see?" The end of the clothesline was a chewed and frayed tangle of fiber and little puffs of cotton. The little puffs were dewed with minute drops of blood. No one contradicted Mrs. Carmody. My Catlin let the door swing shut. All right, we are going to stop there for now. I'm hoping to read tomorrow. I don't think we're going to get through the whole thing. It'll probably be 2 more sections. I'm hoping to read tomorrow morning, but it honestly all depends on whether or not I get picked up before 11. I'm hoping not to be picked up until like 1 or noon or 1, maybe even 2. But tomorrow night I probably won't be reading because I have no idea when I'm getting home. I could get home anywhere from 8 to midnight, so I'm really not sure. But we will finish this either. If I'm home early, like say I'm home at 8 o'clock, I will read. But if not, then we will finish this Sunday. But I'm going to read a couple hours, hopefully tomorrow morning. But if I'm not on, I do apologize. It just means that I was picked up early. Okay? So if not, then we will finish it Sunday. So if I don't get on tomorrow, y'all have a wonderful Saturday. Enjoy the weekend. Unfortunately, here it's going to storm, but it's the parade. Of course it is. We have the biggest night parade in I don't know if it's in Pennsylvania or in the area, but yeah, it's the biggest night parade. It's awesome. At least for us anyway. We're proud of it. So far, I'm not sure what you guys think. I think it's pretty awesome. I think it's really, really a good book. The next one I want to read after this was one that Stephen King actually mentioned in the beginning of this book, and it's The House on Maple Street. So I'd like to read that next. So I think we've got a couple coming up. Somebody else suggested to read it, so I may decide to read it. I may actually decide to start reading that one to everybody. So as long as y'all, are okay with that. I'm not sure of the, by watching the movie, I would say, clowns, death, maybe swearing, but we'll see. So thank you all for sitting with me, for listening to our reading. I'm thinking of calling this the Reader's Nook instead of Lady Rain. So I'm not real sure, but at the moment, I like the way it is. On YouTube, I am the Reader's Nook now. So we read books over there. But for now, I'm going to let y'all go. I'm going to give my voice a rest, and I'm going to rest my hands. So I will see you all soon. I love y'all. If you haven't followed, you're more than welcome to. That way you always know when I'm on. There's a Discord in case you guys want to join that, so you're always up to date on, when we're going to read. I'm trying to at least give an hour's notice, but I'm having difficulty because there's so much going on, but I'm going to try. So, like tonight, I gave a couple hours notice because I was able to read. So, it's awesome. Anyway, I am going to let y'all go. I love y'all. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good night. Thank you. Bye.